I was sitting in my tiny office, staring at the framed photo of my brother and me from a summer long gone. We were kids then, sandy feet, sunburned shoulders, and dreams bigger than the ocean. We were best friends, partners in crime, brothers who promised to always have each other's back. But today, looking at that same photo, my gut twisted with a pain I couldn't shake. My brother, my own blood, had become the reason I lost everything. It all started 6 months ago. Back then, I was working as a senior project manager at a big tech company. I was good at my job, driven, focused, and respected. My team trusted me, and I took pride in leading them through the chaos of endless deadlines and high-stakes decisions. My brother Liam had always been the charming one, the smooth talker, the guy who could sell a broken toaster to a billionaire. We were different, but I thought we balanced each other out. I believed we'd always find a way to be there for each other, no matter what. Liam was struggling. He'd been laid off a year before and was bouncing between odd jobs, never really finding his footing. I'd loaned him money more times than I could count, always telling myself that family came first. I'd let him crash on my couch when he needed it, bought him groceries when he was down, and listened to his endless talk about big dreams that never seemed to materialize. I didn't mind. He was my brother, and I'd always believed in him. Then, everything changed. One rainy Thursday afternoon, my boss called me into his office. His face was tight, lips pressed together like he was holding back something big. My palms started to sweat. He told me there had been a breach, a massive leak of sensitive company data. An anonymous tipster had come forward, and all the evidence pointed to me. My heart stopped. I knew I hadn't done it. I'd been nothing but loyal, working late nights and giving everything I had to that company. But the evidence was overwhelming. Emails I didn't write, files I'd never seen, all traced back to my login. It was like I was looking at a crime scene with my fingerprints everywhere. I was fired on the spot. Security walked me out of the building like I was some criminal. I'll never forget the shame, the disbelief, the way my coworkers averted their eyes as I gathered my things. I was too stunned to cry, too angry to scream. I just walked out into the rain, feeling like I'd been gutted. It wasn't until weeks later that the truth came out. A mutual friend of ours, drunk and guilt-ridden, told me everything. Liam had hacked into my accounts to sell company secrets to a competitor for a quick payout. My own brother had framed me, watched me lose my job, and said nothing. I remember the moment it sank in, the taste of bile in my throat, the way my hands shook as I realized the betrayal cut deeper than any wound I'd ever known. I felt like my whole world had caved in. The person I'd trusted most had ruined. My life with a few strokes on a keyboard, and in that moment, all I could feel was the weight of betrayal, the kind that leaves scars you can't see but feel every day. The days that followed felt like a blur, a fog of disbelief and simmering rage. I spent hours pacing my apartment, my mind racing in circles. How could Liam do this to me? I kept trying to find some explanation, some shred of reason that would make this betrayal easier to swallow. But no matter how I twisted it, there was nothing that made sense. I'd always believed that loyalty was a given between brothers, that no matter how far we drifted or how hard times got, we'd never turn on each other. That belief was the bedrock of my entire world. And now it was cracked and crumbling. At night, sleep was a distant memory. My mind replayed every conversation I'd had with Liam in the weeks leading up to my firing. Every late-night phone call, every text where he asked for another loan, every time he brushed off my questions about what he was really up to. I started to remember the way he avoided eye contact when I asked how his job search was going, the hollow promises that he'd pay me back soon. I'd been too busy to see the signs back then, too wrapped up in my own world to notice the way his desperation was turning into something darker. During the day, I kept myself busy. I'd thrown myself into freelance work, anything to keep the lights on and the rent paid. But every time I sent out a pitch or joined a video call, I felt like an imposter. My confidence was shot, and I couldn't shake the nagging thought that everyone could see right through me, that they knew what had happened, that they were just waiting for me to mess up again. And then there were the little things, the phone calls that dropped as soon as I answered, the emails from unfamiliar addresses with subject lines that made my stomach clench. I started getting friend requests from random profiles, messages that felt too personal, too invasive. It was like Liam's betrayal had followed me into every corner of my life, a shadow I couldn't outrun. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my old laptop, the one I'd used back at the company, and started digging. I opened up every file, every email, every chat log, searching for anything that would prove I wasn't the one who'd leaked those files. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type, but I kept going, driven by a fury that wouldn't let me rest. That's when I found it, a single message buried in a folder I didn't remember creating. It was a conversation between Liam and someone I didn't know. The subject line was final payment. My eyes locked onto those words like a lifeline, my breath catching in my throat. The message was short, just a few lines, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Got the files you wanted? Payment details below. There it was, proof that Liam had been selling company secrets. Proof that he'd used my name, my accounts to do it. But there was no name attached to the other side of the conversation, no details about who he'd sold to. Just a burner email, a digital ghost that offered no clues. I wanted to believe it was all some misunderstanding, that maybe Liam had been set up too. But deep down, I knew. I could feel it in my bones. He'd done it. My brother, the person I'd shared everything with, had thrown me to the wolves for a paycheck. The next day I called him. My hands were clammy as I listened to the phone ring, each tone a drumbeat in my chest. When he finally picked up, his voice was bright and casual, like nothing had happened. "Hey man, what's up?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. "We need to talk." He hesitated for just a second, then laughed. "Sure, what about?" "You know what?" My voice was low, steady, but inside I was trembling. "I found the emails, Liam. The files. I know what you did." There was a beat of silence, so brief I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then he let out a nervous chuckle. "Come on, man, you're being paranoid." "I don't know what you're talking about," but I heard the lie in his voice, the crack in his mask. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. "I'm not stupid, Liam. I know you sold them. I know you used my accounts." For a moment, I thought he might confess, that he'd finally admit what he'd done, and maybe, just maybe, I'd be able to forgive him. But he didn't. He just laughed again, this time a hollow, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "You're crazy, man. You need to let this go." And with that, he hung up. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. The finality of the click felt like a door slamming shut. I sank down onto the floor, the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. In that moment, I realized I was on my own. No one was coming to save me. No one was going to make this right. It was just me, and the truth I'd uncovered, whether or not the world believed it. I closed my eyes and took a shaky breath. My brother had betrayed me, and now he was pretending like it never happened. But I wasn't going to let it go. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I didn't know how, but I was going to find a way to prove the truth to the world. Because if there was one thing I'd learned, it was that the person who stabs you in the back is usually the one you thought would stand by your side. And I wasn't about to let that be the final word. The days after that phone call with Liam were some of the hardest I've ever faced. My mind was a constant battlefield, torn between grief for the brother I thought I knew and the cold, steely resolve that was slowly hardening inside me. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not after everything he'd taken from me. I needed real proof, something undeniable, something that would stand up to scrutiny and silence every last one of his excuses. I started by going back to that message I'd found. I stared at it for hours, dissecting every word, every timestamp. Then I noticed something I'd missed before, a tiny string of characters at the bottom. It looked like an ID tag, some kind of transaction code. My pulse quickened. It was a clue, something I could trace. I reached out to an old friend of mine, Kara, who worked in cybersecurity. We'd met years ago when I was just starting out, and she'd always been the person I called when I needed help with digital forensics. When she answered my message, I could hear the concern in her voice. "Tell me what's going on," she said. I took a deep breath and told her everything. About Liam, the files, the message I'd found. About how I'd been fired and how no one seemed to believe I wasn't the one who'd betrayed them. She didn't hesitate. "Send me the file. I'll see what I can dig up." I forwarded the email and waited. It was the longest night of my life. Every minute felt like an hour. Every shadow in my apartment a reminder of how alone I felt. But beneath the fear was a growing fire, a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. The next morning, Kara called me back, Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge of excitement. "I traced the transaction code," she said. "It's linked to a cryptocurrency wallet. Whoever paid Liam, they did it in Bitcoin." My heart was racing. "Can you see who it belongs to?" She sighed. "Not directly. But I found a connection. There's a series of transactions that go through a crypto exchange, one that requires ID verification. If we can subpoena those records, we might be able to trace it back to the buyer." It was a start. I thanked her, my mind already working through the possibilities. I didn't have the power to subpoena anything, but I knew someone who did. My old boss, the one who'd fired me. He still had skin in the game, and if I could prove I wasn't the traitor, he'd have every reason to help me. I called him that afternoon. My hands were clammy as I explained what I'd found, careful not to sound desperate, even though I was. He was skeptical at first, but when I told him about the Bitcoin wallet, he agreed to meet me. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town. He looked older than I remembered, maybe because I wasn't seeing him through the haze of workplace loyalty anymore. As I slid the evidence across the table, I could see the doubt in his eyes shifting, turning into something else. "This is substantial," he said slowly. "But it's not enough on its own." "I know," I said. My voice was steady, even though inside I was screaming. "But if you can help me get the exchange records, I can prove it wasn't me." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do." I walked out of that cafe, feeling like I'd just taken my first real step back into the world. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a man on a mission, and I wasn't going to let my brother's lies define me. But it wasn't just about proving my innocence anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about showing Liam that I wasn't the fool he thought I was. I started compiling everything I had, every text message, every email, every scrap of evidence that tied him to what he'd done. I backed it all up in encrypted drives, made copies, and stored them in places no one would think to look. I wasn't going to risk losing it all again. At the same time, I started talking to people, quietly, carefully. Friends who still worked at the company, old contacts who'd heard rumors about the breach. Piece by piece, the picture started to come together. Liam hadn't just sold company secrets. He'd leveraged my name and my reputation to get close to people who trusted me, using that trust as a bargaining chip. The betrayal cut deeper with every new revelation. But there was a strange clarity in it too, like the fog of grief was lifting, leaving only the sharp edges of determination. I wasn't just trying to clear my name anymore. I was going to make sure he couldn't do this to anyone else. One night, I sat alone in my apartment, the walls covered in sticky notes and printouts, my own war room. I stared at it all, feeling the weight of what I was doing. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe Liam would come to his senses, that he'd call me up and confess, beg for forgiveness, and we'd find a way to fix this. But I knew that was a fantasy. The Liam I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. Someone who'd sold me out and walked away without a backward glance. I took a deep breath and looked at the evidence one last time. My brother had made his choices. Now it was my turn. I was done being the victim. I was done letting him control the narrative. I didn't know how this would end. But I knew one thing for sure. I was going to see it through to the end, no matter what it cost me. Because sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop hoping for the best and start preparing for the worst. And I was ready. I woke up that morning with a knot of cold steel in my gut. I'd spent weeks collecting every shred of evidence I could find, mapping out connections and double-checking every lead until there was no room left for doubt. I was done waiting. It was time to face my brother, and to finally put an end to the web of lies he'd spun around my life. I drove to the rundown co-working space where he'd been trying to launch his own half-baked consulting business, a venture built on hollow promises and half-truths. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. I had the records. I had the chain of transactions from the crypto exchange, the time-stamped messages, the files that proved everything. And I was ready to make sure he saw it all. When I walked into that dusty room, Liam was sitting at a table littered with papers and coffee cups, his laptop open in front of him. He looked up, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. But he covered it fast, leaning back in his chair with that easy grin that had always been his go-to defense. "Hey, man, what's up? You look intense. I didn't bother sitting down." I pulled the thick folder of evidence from my bag and dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. He jumped a little at the sound, his eyes narrowing. "You know what this is," I said, my voice low and even. "You know exactly what you did." He gave me a little laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You're still stuck on that, huh? Come on, man. We're brothers. Let's not do this." "Brothers?" I said, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and adrenaline. "You sold me out, Liam. You framed me, took my life and my reputation, and sold it off like it meant nothing." He tried to play it cool, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said, his voice a shade too calm. "You're gonna ruin everything over some misunderstanding. Stop lying." My voice cracked like a whip in the room, the word echoing off the walls. I reached across the table, shoving the folder closer to him. "Read it. Every message, every transaction. I traced the money, Liam. I traced it all the way back to you." His mouth opened like he was going to protest, but nothing came out. For the first time, he looked cornered, like he could see there was no easy way out this time. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not just some fool you can brush off, Liam. I have proof, and I'm going public with it." He swallowed hard, his fingers drumming nervously against the table. "You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't—" "I already have," I said, cutting him off. "I sent copies to the company's legal team. To the press, to everyone who needs to see what you did. They're not just going to take my word for it. They're going to see the truth for themselves." His face drained of color. For a moment, I saw the real Liam, the one behind the charm, the one who'd always looked out for himself first. "You're going to destroy me," he said, his voice shaking. "You destroyed yourself," I said coldly. "You chose this, Liam. And now you're going to face the consequences." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping back against the floor. "We're family, man. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I felt the anger bubbling in my chest, but beneath it was something else, something final. Family doesn't stab you in the back and then expect you to pretend it didn't happen. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was expendable. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, like he was searching for the right words. But there was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out, the folder still on the table in front of him, a testament to every lie he'd told. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, the sky a pale winter gray. My hands were still shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd faced him. I'd made him look me in the eye and see that he couldn't hide anymore. As I walked down the cracked sidewalk, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Kara. "Company lawyers got the documents. They're opening a case. Hang in there." I let out a long breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. It was far from over. I knew that. There would be legal battles, and my name would be dragged through the mud all over again. But this time, I had the truth on my side. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed that was enough. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes of evidence, my eyes tired, but my mind clear. I thought about all the nights I'd spent second-guessing myself, all the times I'd wondered if maybe I'd imagined it all. But no, the proof was there, and I was done doubting myself. I poured myself a drink and raised it to the empty room. "To the end," I said quietly, my voice steady, "and to the new beginning that comes after." Because there was no going back to the way things were, but maybe, just maybe, there was something stronger waiting on the other side of the truth. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal. The company's legal team moved fast, opening an internal investigation that turned up even more evidence of Liam's betrayal. The story hit the trade papers and then the bigger tech news outlets, headlines that spelled out exactly what had happened. My brother's name was everywhere, no longer the charming hustler everyone had believed in, but a cautionary tale of greed and treachery. I watched from the sidelines, my phone buzzing with messages from old colleagues and friends. Some reached out to apologize for doubting me, their words tinged with guilt and relief. Others were just shocked, unsure how to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the truth that had been exposed. I tried not to dwell on the messages too much. I knew it wasn't about them, it was about finally seeing the lie for what it was, and refusing to let it define me. My old boss called me personally, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have trusted you." There was no satisfaction in hearing that. just a dull ache that reminded me how much I'd lost. As for Liam, his world crumbled around him. His consulting business folded overnight. The people who had once called him a genius wanted nothing to do with him now. His name was poison in the industry, and the silence that followed was louder than any words he could have spoken. I saw him once more, just by chance. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched under the weight of what he'd done. Our eyes met for a moment, just a flicker of recognition, and then he turned away, disappearing into the crowd. I didn't call after him. There was nothing left to say. In the quiet that followed, I finally let myself breathe. It was strange, this feeling of vindication. It wasn't triumphant. It was more like a deep exhale, a release of everything I'd been holding inside. I wasn't the same person who'd been blindsided by betrayal. I was someone who'd faced the truth and come out the other side, scarred but stronger. But even in that closure, there was still an ache, a part of me that would always feel the sting of losing my brother, not to some distant tragedy, but to a choice he'd made with his own hands. That was a kind of grief that didn't fade easily. I stood in my tiny office, looking at that old photo of us again, two kids who'd once promised each other the world, and I realized that some promises aren't meant to be kept. Some are meant to be broken, so we can finally see what's real. In that moment, I felt the weight of the past start to lift. My brother had made his choices, and now I was making mine. I was done living in the shadow of his betrayal. It was time to let go, to build something new, not out of revenge, but out of the truth I'd fought so hard to claim. In the weeks that followed, life took on a quiet rhythm I hadn't known I needed. The legal battles kept unfolding, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning. The storm had passed. The world knew the truth now, and no one could take that away from me. I started focusing on what I wanted to build for myself, turning the weight of betrayal into fuel for something better. My small startup, the one I'd been dreaming about for years, finally started taking shape. I poured everything I had into it, my time, my energy, my determination to create something real and honest. It was a fresh start, one that didn't carry the shadow of my brother's lies. The nights were still hard sometimes. There were moments when I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Liam used to laugh, the way he'd always been able to charm his way out of anything. But those memories didn't have the same hold over me anymore. They were just echoes, pieces of a past I'd finally stopped trying to fix. I reached out to people who believed in me, old friends, new connections. I was honest with them about what had happened. I didn't sugarcoat it or make excuses. And the more I talked about it, the more I felt that knot in my chest loosen. It was like speaking the truth out loud gave me permission to leave it behind. One evening, I found myself standing at the window of my new office, small and cluttered, but mine. I watched the city lights flicker to life as the sun set, feeling the quiet hum of possibility in the air. I realized I'd spent so long letting other people's choices define me, letting the betrayal weigh me down like an anchor. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was stronger, I was wiser, and I was finally free. I thought about Liam sometimes, wondered if he was out there, regretting what he'd done. But I didn't let myself get lost in those thoughts. His choices were his own, and I'd stopped letting them bleed into my life. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could decide what I did with it. The startup grew slowly but steadily, fueled by the kind of honest, hard work that I'd always believed in. My team was small, but they were people who shared my vision. People who understood that trust wasn't just a word, it was the foundation of everything. Every milestone we hit felt like a small victory, proof that I wasn't defined by what had been done to me. I started sleeping again, real sleep that didn't leave me feeling like I was caught in a nightmare. My laughter came back too, tentative at first, then louder and easier. I remembered what it felt like to wake up in the morning with hope instead of dread. Looking back, I realized that Liam's betrayal had taught me something I hadn't known I needed to learn, that no matter how deep the cut, no matter how close the betrayal, the only way forward is to keep moving, to trust yourself even when everything else falls apart, to build something real, something lasting, out of the ashes. Standing in that quiet office, surrounded by the messy beginnings of my dream, I felt at peace. The past was behind me. My brother was behind me. And ahead of me was a life that was finally my own, honest, hopeful, and unshakable. Looking back on everything, I've realized that betrayal doesn't just tear apart what you had. It forces you to see what you're really made of. It tests you in ways you never imagined, stripping away the illusions you thought you needed to survive. And in that raw, exposed place, you either find your strength or you let it destroy you. For me, the choice was never really a choice at all. I couldn't change what Liam had done. I couldn't undo the nights of doubt and the days of relentless questioning. But I could decide what those scars meant. I could decide to let them make me stronger instead of smaller. I've learned that loyalty isn't about blood or promises whispered in the dark. It's about showing up for yourself when no one else will. It's about refusing to let someone else's betrayal rewrite your story. Because at the end of the day, your story belongs to you alone. There's a strange kind of peace in that knowledge, a quiet power that comes from knowing you survived the worst someone could do to you and still found a way to stand, to rebuild, to believe in something good again, even when it seems impossible. If there's one thing I want to leave behind from all of this, it's that we're all stronger than we think. The world will break your heart, and sometimes the people closest to you will be the ones holding the hammer. But that doesn't mean you're doomed to stay broken. It means you get to choose how you put yourself back together. I'll never forget the day I realized I wasn't a victim anymore, that the weight I'd been carrying was just the proof of how far I'd come, and that, in the end, the truest measure of strength isn't whether you avoid the fall. It's whether you find the courage to rise again after it. So if you're standing in the ruins of something that once felt safe, know this: you're not alone, you're not weak, and you're not defined by what someone else did to you. You're defined by what you do next, and what comes next is yours.